If you're not happy with your investments, if you've ever tried the stock market and haven't done well, hop in the car and get to Online Trading Academy. Online Trading Academy's pro investors show you how they find the right investments. Learn current Wall Street skills about stocks, options, futures, forex, even Bitcoin. See how market timing works and how money is made in up, down, and sideways markets by using their patented rules-based strategy. It helps find the right investment and limit the risk. The instructors at Online Trading Academy are certified, currently trade, and are profitable. They show you how they invest every day. Call now for a pair of tickets to a free half-day class at Online Trading Academy. Classes are all over Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Jupiter, and Port St. Lucie. Call Online Trading Academy now. Call 954-668-2510. 954-668-2510. 954-668-2510.
What is the Del Walmsley Radio Show?
Welcome to the Del Walmsley Radio Show, where the hype ends and the help begins. I'm your host, Del Walmsley, and as always, we're working on your financial freedom.
Listen to the Del Walmsley Radio Show, Mondays at 5, Tuesday through Friday at noon on WNN.
If you've decided to get back to feeling good again like you used to feel, then you're invited to tune in to the Dr. Bob Martin Show. Hi, I'm Dr. Bob, at your service Sunday mornings at 10 on Talk 1470 WNN.
Now you can get Talk 1470 WNN on 95.3 FM too. Loud and clear, Health and Wealth Radio, WNN.
The opinions expressed on the following sponsored program are strictly those of the host, guests, and callers, and not necessarily those of this station, its staff, management, or sponsors. Are you a family caregiver? Are you caregiving for someone who can no longer take care of themselves? Are you overwhelmed? This is Caregiver Solutions Info with Marcia Teal. Marcia will be hosting an hour of true stories and information, tips and updates of the latest research and necessary information in the caregiving field, focusing on you, the family caregiver. An Alzheimer's disease and dementia care expert, Marcia has 15 years of hands-on experience at Arden Courts, a leader in assisted living dementia communities here in the U.S. Marcia covers everything you need to know as a family caregiver, especially if you care for a loved one with Alzheimer's disease or other related dementia or chronic illness. If you have a friend or relative that is also a family caregiver, call them now. They won't want to miss a minute. And let them know they can watch on caregiversolutions.info. And they can listen on WNN 1470 AM in South Florida or nationally on the iHeartRadio app. Now, sit back, relax, and learn from our host, Marcia Teal, as she brings information to you that may just be the caregiving solution you need.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Caregiver Solutions Info Show. I'm so happy you could join us today. We have another wonderful program. This show is for you, family caregivers. If you're caring for someone that can't care for themselves, maybe because they have some form of dementia, Alzheimer's, vascular dementia, somebody has memory problems, then you know that it's not an easy task. It's a very difficult journey. And this show was created to help you as another resource, to give you some good advice, some tips and information that can help you along your caregiving journey. We are live from Boca Raton, Florida, and I'm glad you're here because it's summer and, you know, it is very difficult to keep your loved ones busy. So, you know, in past shows, we've given tips on how to engage your loved one. We've given tips on how caregivers can take care of themselves. We talk about all kinds of topics, so you never know what we're going to talk about. But today's topic is extra important, I think, because it's not talked about probably enough. And it's something that sometimes people don't want to talk about, but it's important. And so my guest today is such an expert, such a wonderful person, and has such compassion and experience and knowledge that this is going to be just so great. I know it is. So to let you know what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about the process of dying and what happens as our loved ones go through the different stages and they're regressing and they're progressing into the end stages of life, what to expect and things that you should know so that you're not caught surprised or unaware. And we always say that caregivers should always be prepared. And this is part of being prepared. It's just an educational process so that you understand and know what's going to happen. And it may not happen the same for everybody, but just like caregiving, it's different for everybody because every person you care for is different. There's no black and white in caregiving. It really depends on a lot of factors. And sometimes that's what makes it so hard and scary because you don't know what to expect. So I'm glad you're here, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce you to my special guest. His name is Gregory Sherman, and he is chaplain with Vitas Healthcare and Hospice. Hi, Greg.
Hi, Marcia. Thank you, and thank you for those kind words and for that wonderful introduction.
Well, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm excited that you're here. You have so much to say on this subject because you've been doing this a long time.
Right.
And
over 8 years.
Over 8 years being a chaplain. And I just want to tell everybody that you actually have your master's in theology and your master's in divinity.
That's correct. Yeah.
And you are using it to help people through this very difficult journey of caregiving for someone who can't care for themselves through the end of life. Right. And again, I'm sure that you have a lot of stories you're going to tell us because we learn best from real examples. And so I know that you're going to be sharing a lot with us.
Great.
So before we get into that, I want to ask you, what is the role of a hospice chaplain? Because you go into assisted livings and independent livings.
Correct.
And you are there to do what?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's really important that the chaplains are interfaith chaplains. Each of us with Vitas Healthcare and Hospice have at least a Master's of Divinity. We have completed a 400-hour class on clinical pastoral education. We have 5 years of clinical experience even before Vitas will even interview us. And what's really important is that we have the ability to be an interfaith chaplain. As we meet people where they are. I happen to be a Roman Catholic deacon. I've been ordained for 25 years. But when I go in as a hospice chaplain, it's meeting the patient, the family, the caregivers, and the staff where they are. It happens so that I'm on an assisted living facility team here in South Palm Beach County. About 60% of our patients are of the Jewish tradition. And frequently they'll ask me or family members, well, what are you going to be able to offer my loved one? As a chaplain. And what's really important, Marcia, is that we meet people, not just myself, but all of us chaplains with Vitas. We meet people where they are, and we also recognize, as I had to recognize some 14 years ago, that entering into a relationship with hospice, quite frankly, is a scary thing initially. It's a difficult thing for family members to do. So we're, as chaplains, we're there to provide information, and most especially as part of the team to provide comfort to the patient, the family members, and frankly a difficult time in their lives.
That's a big job.
It is. And we have not just our particular hospice organization, but pretty much the hospice organizations throughout the United States. We have what's called an interdisciplinary team approach, where we have a doctor, a registered nurse, chaplain, social worker, the CNAs, the aides, all work as a team. And it is a difficult job. We have different sets of eyes looking at the patients and the family members. We meet regularly. In fact, today is Tuesday, happens to be the day of the week when our team meets for our weekly meeting, and we discuss new admissions. We discuss people under critical care, crisis care, facing end of life. So we recognize it's a difficult job for families. All of us who work, and I can speak for myself, but really anyone who's been in hospice care for a while, we like to think that we have a hospice heart. I taught school for many years, and I enjoyed it. And I remembered about 6 months after leaving teaching and being a hospice chaplain, a teacher sitting next to me at a wedding reception said, "Greg, I've known you for a long time, and what you're doing is great, but isn't it depressing every day?" And I paused for a few moments, and I said, that actually is a very reasonable question. I said, I haven't been depressed a single day that I've been a hospice chaplain. At that point, it was only 6 months. It's now 8 years. There's great sadness. There's great challenges, and I'll share those a little bit more personally about what I went through with my mother a while back. But it is it's not for everybody, and we who are in hospice don't consider ourselves martyrs or saints or anything. We just feel really called to do what we do.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you described about the team effort, because we always tell caregivers that get your team together. It takes more than one person to be able to care for a person with Alzheimer's, for instance, and you got to get your team, your support people, your advocates, and get the help there that you need. And so this is another part of team, is what you all do as a team for the hospice services that you provide. So I think that's great, because it goes hand in hand what we always tell caregivers.
It really does, Marcia.
You mentioned just now that about your mom, and that you were a caregiver for your mom as a primary caregiver.
I was, yeah.
Yeah, so did caring for your mom, or how did caring for your mom maybe prepare you for the job that you do now?
Right. At the time, in the very beginning stages of my mother's dementia, and that was June of 2001, about 16, 17 years ago, I was teaching full-time at a local high school, Cardinal Newman Catholic High School in West Palm, really enjoying it, coaching the golf team. My father had predeceased my mother by about several years. But I remembered that there was a particular day when I stopped by my mother's house on the way home from school. At that point, I was spending time with my mom literally every day, and she was going through the real grief process of losing my dad, losing her husband of 57 years.
Wow.
And I remember a particular day when I went to her house after school that afternoon, noticed the newspaper on the porch in front of the house, and that was unusual. My mother was a reader, and I went into the house, and Mom kind of had an empty look, and condensing the story, I thought something was going on, so I excused myself, called my brother, who was local. I said, get over here, something's going on with Mom.
You knew she wasn't normal.
I could tell she wasn't normal. She wasn't normal, and very specifically, she got up, went out into the kitchen, and looked at the microwave, and it took us a long time to convince my parents to get a microwave, but when they finally did, she used it a lot, and she stood in front of the microwave. She looked at it, and she turned to me, she says, honey, can you show me how to use this? Boom. And that's when I knew something, and I think probably people listening in, watching the show, can pretty much name maybe a particular event or time when they recognized that the dementia was set at a very difficult time.
Sometimes they don't know it when it happens, but looking back, a lot of times they'll say, oh yeah, looking back, that's probably when it started.
True.
And they do have an event or something that happens, that just like you said. So you cared for your mom for many years.
About 3.5 years. And going through the different stages, now I did a lot of self-education back then. It was long before I was a chaplain. So I was going online and finding out what is going on. And I know now that the really dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's or vascular dementia or other forms, really develops in about 3 stages: the early stages, the mid stages, and the end stages. And all of them present their challenges and difficulties. As with my mother, and I know this probably can be very painful and difficult for caregivers, because I've experienced not only personally, but in the 8 years I've been a chaplain, that the mood swings, and those can be pretty pronounced in the very beginning stages. The term, it's a Latin term, I remember it from the seminary, is liminal stage, which means literally between 2 doors. And in my mother's case, who was a very smart woman, very talented, raised 7 children, was a very good artist, I could tell that she knew she was losing it.
She was aware.
But she was aware, and that's that liminal stage. And then what presents itself after that is anger, understandable frustration, and that presents a real challenge not only for our loved ones, but for us as caregivers.
That is very hard. I think sometimes even more so for sons, because sons aren't usually the caregivers when it comes to, taking so much care of children, at least, not back a number of years ago, more the daughters. So, as a son stepping into that role, you weren't really prepared.
No. In fact, it's very interesting you mentioned that observation, Marcia, is that in the 8 years I've been a chaplain, we get a case sheet for each new patient that we have, and it lists the primary caregivers, the healthcare surrogates, the POAs, and so forth. Many of our caregivers live out of the area because their parents are retired to this beautiful Palm Beach County. More frequently than not, the daughters are the caregivers, without exception. And there can be sons involved, but they're the principal caregivers, either from a distance or local.
Right. And so you educated yourself because back then, that we're talking, 15, 20 years ago?
16 years ago, the beginning of it, yeah.
Right. So there were probably not as many resources available, support groups and seminars and things that you could avail yourself of to educate yourself, especially if you were working.
That's right. I was working full-time.
So you learned as you went, and you had the dance, I call it the dance, with your mom.
It's a good image. It is a dance. It's a good image for not only what's going on, but for, I think, surviving and getting through being a caregiver. Oh, gosh, I made a lot of mistakes in the beginning that I know now. The biggest mistake, and I'll share it if we have a little bit time. We have quite a bit of time. One of the biggest mistakes, as I remember now, Mom would say something, or she'd ask me something I had just told her. This is, she was advancing that, and I'd say, Mom, we just talked about that. No, Mom, don't you remember? And I know now that's just not the right thing to say. But I had to learn.
Well, you had to learn, and that's a natural response.
It is.
But then if you understand the disease, you know that she doesn't remember that you just talked about it.
That's right.
And it's a trial and error, and you go through it.
And another important thing is caregiving, and I look back in retrospect, but also at present time, that we as caregivers, and I'm a chaplain now, but I will always refer to myself as a caregiver. I'm a caregiver alumnus for my mother, and managing a lot of things in between. And I had siblings who helped out, and we also had our challenges as family dynamics. But one of the biggest things to share with caregivers, if you make a mistake, it's okay.
Yeah.
You're learning. It's a process. And you also mentioned something very important, Marcia, is our loved ones, as they progress through this disease, they're not going to really have that memory that, oh gosh, Greg said that to me, or so-and-so. So we have to forgive ourselves. There's a lot of things we need to do with ourselves as caregivers, and we'll have plenty of opportunity more to talk about that.
Exactly. You have to not only forgive yourself, but forgive your loved one, because it's not really them
Absolutely.
that you're dealing with. It's the disease that's making them that way. And that's a hard concept sometimes for people to grasp, that it's not really Dad saying these awful things to me that he never would have said, but because of the disease, and it's just coming out because of how it affects your brain.
Exactly. As I frequently tell our families, particularly if they're beginning the stages of and when they, frankly, are under our care, under hospice care, they're usually in the final stages, but they've gone through the beginning stages, mid stages of Alzheimer's and dementia. Is one of the things I impart is that when you feel you've said something wrong, learn from it. And I can't overemphasize, forgive yourself, and get the support that's out there that's so important. The support from support groups, talking to people. If your loved ones are in assisted living facilities, as my mother ended up, living for almost 9 months in Arden Courts in West Palm, and that the support groups are there, and to seek them out.
Yeah, very good advice. We're going to stop and take a quick commercial break. When we come back, I'm going to pick up where you left off, Greg, and we're going to talk about some of those family dynamics you mentioned.
Right.
All right, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Arden Courts is not just a place to live, it's a place to call home. Residential living combined with quality caregiving. This is the philosophy behind Arden Courts. Communities created exclusively for individuals with Alzheimer's disease and related dementia who would benefit from a safe and structured environment. For additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides, call 888-478-2828. 2410 to locate a community nearest you. Inquire about our educational seminars, resource library, or support groups, or simply feel free to ask questions you may have about Alzheimer's and related dementias. At Arden Courts, we know, we understand, and we can help because memory care is all we do. Remember, call 888-478-2410 for additional information about any of the unique services Arden Courts provides.
Hi, I'm Michael Mole, owner of two. Specifically trained in Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's care, our caregivers can help anytime from 1 hour to 24/7 or live in. Call senior helpers today.
This often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts.
In South Palm Beach County. And we're talking about caregiving and family dynamics, which we're just going to be getting into now, Greg. You mentioned that earlier because you have siblings, right?
I do.
And you were a primary caregiver for your mother for over 3 years.
That's right.
So how did family dynamics enter into the picture, and how did it make your job maybe harder, or what did you learn from that?
Well, first of all, when my mother was going into the beginning stages of her dementia, there were a total of 7 of us, 5 in the area and 2 out of state. And one of my siblings, was out of state, and my father had set him up. And again, my father had predeceased my mother to be really in charge of most of the major decisions, but I was local. And so the real dynamics were, and again, it was a dance at first, and then maybe even a all-out fist fight. No, we never really got to that point. But very seriously, we had some major differences about what type of care mother needed locally, spending time. And I was teaching full-time and coaching a golf team and other activities, and I had a life. And I could see that when I was the primary caregiver, for about 3 or 4 months until we had a full-time live-in caregiver for my mother, who was really wonderful, but it still meant being by the house every day and working with the full-time live-in caregiver, that there were a lot of phone calls up to particularly one sibling who was out of the area, who was trying to make decisions without being down here. And that was very, very challenging. And the biggest thing is I never, and I think for the most part succeeded, never wanted to have my mother hear those differences. She had a lot of challenges going on. And on the positive note, I did have a sister local and a brother who had things going on in their families, but they also were very helpful. So there was the local support. But definitely there were family dynamics throughout the whole course and afterwards as well.
Well, with a lot of siblings, it's hard sometimes to all be on the same page.
Absolutely.
As to what everyone agrees that should happen. And especially when you have a sibling that's out of the area or out of state, right, who's trying to quarterback, right, from afar, that's really not in the trenches, doesn't really understand what's going on because you're there every day and you're living it. And unless they're there with you, you know, seeing it and being there, they don't really totally understand the whole picture.
No, that's exactly right, Marcia. Mm-hmm. And I've encountered it the full 8 years I've been a chaplain, which, by the way, in those 8 years of chaplaincy with Vitas Healthcare and Hospice, almost primarily with persons in assisted living facilities with advanced forms of dementia. Frequently, there isn't a week that goes by when we don't have a family involved with family dynamics. They're real. And there are ways of dealing with them constructively, realistically, not denying them, and at the same time to recognize that there are going to be some really difficult moments. And as I got to really the point where I could tell my brother, a brother who was out of the area, who was really calling the shots, I said, this isn't about you, this isn't about me, this is about our dad, who predeceased Mom, who wanted to be sure that Mom was taken care of, and it's about our mom. So I think on the whole, when we had that approach, I know for me it was a healthy way of responding to the differences. And then there are other things that we can talk about, caregiving for the caregiver.
Yes, and that's really important
Self-care.
too, because caregivers do deny themselves so much. How did you care for yourself as a caregiver?
Honestly, at first, not well. I really didn't. Since I was here, I was doing a lot of things, and I thought I had a pretty high threshold, which I do. But then it got to the point where I really recognized and had to be very direct with the brother in Pennsylvania. In fact, at first he didn't want, and the resources were there, he didn't want to bring in a full-time live-in caregiver. He's had the suggestion, well, you've got a full 3 months off summer from school, why don't you move in with Mom? And I said, I don't think that's going to work. I said, I know the level of care that she needs. So my caregiver was to establish limits within the family.
You had to stand up for yourself, because otherwise, sometimes your siblings might try to guilt you. And again, not knowing all the work that it takes, as you were, there and you're doing it. You have to set boundaries. I think that was a very good thing that you did.
Absolutely. And also I had encouragement. I was teaching at the time. Teachers knew me. I had some hobbies, golf. I also paint, and they kept encouraging me, Greg, don't forget your hobbies while you're managing caregiving for your mother. So that advice I give to all caregivers in whatever capacity is, don't forget the things that you enjoy. Do something fun, and for yourself, that's not being selfish. Do something fun and something enjoyable, at least 1 or 2 things every day or every week.
Wow, that's great advice. Because if caregivers take care of themselves, they're going to be in a better position, probably both physically, mentally, spiritually, to be a better caregiver, right?
Without a doubt. And there are statistics around, and they're getting better these days because there are more caregiver support groups and more awareness. But the statistics are solid there, that very often when caregivers are not taking care of themselves, they develop all sorts of illnesses and dysfunctions. So it's just so important, because obviously if they can't care for themselves and they get it unfailing health, they can't care for their loved one as effectively.
Yeah, that's very true. Wow. So thank you for sharing that. It's not always easy to, talk about your own situation, but again, I think people learn from people who have walked in their shoes. So I thank you for sharing that story with us. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with more from Greg, chaplain at Vitas Healthcare and Hospice. We'll be right back.
Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. The inability to recognize the obvious often occurs with Alzheimer's, particularly among the family members who care for them. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
.info. If you have a question or wish to share a story, call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
Welcome back. At this time, I'd like to thank our national sponsor, Arden Courts Memory Care Community. Arden Courts has about 50 communities all across the United States, 10 right here in Florida, and they are a leader in memory care because memory care is all they do. And as a leader in memory care, they take care of people with memory loss, but they also like to take care of you, the family caregiver, by providing support and resources and lots of things that you don't always get that you need, like hugs, and it's a great community. But today, they're offering you this free book, and this is called the 36-Hour Day Book. It's a wonderful resource. It's written by Dr. Peter Rabins and Nancy Mays, and this book has been out for many years. It's actually in the 5th edition, which means it's continually being updated with new information and guidance for family caregivers who are caring for someone with memory loss. If you don't have this book and you would like it, it's absolutely free just for calling Arden Courts toll-free number, which is 888-478-2410. Again, 888-478-2410. Call them up, tell them that you heard about the offer on the Caregiver Solutions Info Show, and they'll be happy to get a book out to you, get your name, your address, and mail it to you so you can have this book as a great resource in your caregiving journey. So I would highly recommend this book. And if you know somebody that could use it, get it for them. They'll be very happy that you did. So my guest today is Greg Sherman. He's chaplain with Vitas Healthcare and Hospice. And we're talking about all kinds of things because, Greg, you were a caregiver yourself for your mom for many years. And now you've been a chaplain within the hospice realm. And you go to assisted living facilities and independent facilities, counseling with families and giving comfort to the residents and the families.
That's right.
So all this time that you've been doing this and all the many people that you've counseled with, is there anything, maybe more than one, but is there anything that you've learned over the years that surprises you that families don't know that you would think they should, or something that they might need to know that they don't?
Good question. I'll use our family's experience when it came that time for my mother about 16 years ago, after about 2.5 years, better part of 2.5, almost 3 years of advancing dementia. She went from Arden Courts in West Palm, which was a wonderful facility. She went to skilled nursing. And then I remember at the skilled nursing, the director of nursing, who I actually knew through parish associations, she said, Greg, you really should take your mom home, put her under hospice care. And I had the conversations with the brother in Pennsylvania who was really making decisions, but he was listening to me at that time, and another brother. And we all said, but hospice is when you're going to die. Well, we knew our mother was dying, but it was difficult to admit that. And when you hear hospice, you almost automatically think that somehow outside the room, whether it's an assisted living facility or private residence, the Grim Reaper is there.
Like around the corner within maybe a few days, right?
Around a few days. And that's, I don't make light of that because I went through that. So the biggest thing about understanding hospice is that today, as was said, really people can come on hospice. They have to have a terminal diagnosis, and they have to have a recommendation from their physician. That it doesn't mean giving up hope. And I can understand that sentiment. A lot of people agonize with. In fact, in your introduction, Marcia, you introduced correctly so, Vitas Healthcare and Hospice. Well, a trend in the last 2 or 3 years, not just for Vitas, but really for all hospice organizations, certainly in this area and nationally, is to minimize the name hospice in the title, and there's a reason for that. A lot of adult caregivers, they'll tell us, we believe my mom, my father, my partner, my spouse is appropriate for hospice, the doctor, but we don't want them to know. So they'll ask us to not say anything, and we recognize that. Most cases, people who are terminally ill, our loved ones, they know that they're terminally ill. We respect the families, but at some point in time, that's a big part of misunderstanding hospice. We have to come in and educate. And a big part of this is saying that, this doesn't mean your loved one is going to die, in 2 or 3 days or months. We have people that are hospice appropriate, and Medicare is very strict about that, of certifying people. We've had people who are hospice appropriate for 1.5, 2, 3 years, and the quality of life has been enhanced through the hospice care of the team.
Thank you for sharing that, because I agree with you. I think that is a big misconception when people hear the word hospice. It's scary. I mean, that's a scary word.
It is.
And people can't fathom, how can you be on hospice for a year or more?
Right.
But given the circumstances, like you said, it's in the doctor's best medical opinion if that person is going to still be on Earth for 6 months or less, correct?
That's correct.
And nobody knows for sure. Only
That's
God
right.
knows.
That's right.
So they think, well, in my best medical opinion, they'll be on hospice. We think they're appropriate. We don't think this person has 6 months more.
Right.
Or
really the diagnosis is they could within the 6 months. It's like they could pass away in 6 months.
Yes.
But frequently because of the quality of care, and you mentioned it, Marcia, we're not God. We don't know that their life is extended and quality of life is extended.
Yes, quality of life. And sometimes people, what they call rally, right? They rally, meaning that you think they're close, and all of a sudden it's almost like they get a second wind, like we talk about getting a second wind,
Very
and they're
true.
not ready yet.
That's
and so now they can be recertified under hospice through Medicare for another 6 months.
That's exactly
and
right.
so that keeps going because, again, no one knows for sure, but they're receiving all this extra attention and care because of the services provided, and it's a wonderful thing because, like you said, families don't want to give up hope. And
That's
there's
right.
hope that, how would you describe hope for families?
That's another very good observation. I would say hope is every day. Every day is precious, is having quality of life with their loved one. And since we're talking largely about persons with Alzheimer's and dementia, that quality of life may not seem to be there because our loved ones are not able to maybe remember names or sequences or even verbally communicate. But the hope is that we're spending time with them. The hope is that we have that day. That's all we have. We have that moment. And the hope that whatever experience we have with our loved ones, and I came to really believe this with my mom, particularly towards the end stages when there was no more smiling, when she was in a wheelchair, when she was really not able to swallow much. And I could see it in her eyes. I felt that the love was still there, and I've kind of been on a crusade for the last 8 years. I do a lot of funerals. That's part of what we do as chaplains of all different denominations. And when I know invariably that the person has passed away from Alzheimer's or dementia, I mention at some point in time during the service, when you look at your loved one when they were alive, and you had that painful experience of them not remembering names or children's names or grandchildren's names, when they didn't necessarily, quote, acknowledge us, we thought the love was there. And I really believe that. And I've sensed that many, many times. And that persons with advanced dementia and Alzheimer's, I believe this, are able to communicate on a way, and I'm not making any sort of a wonderful, it's a dreadful disease, but it's here. It's going to be with us for all. Able to communicate in ways that we're open to it that really gives a lot of hope. And I experienced that with my mom, and I experience it with patients on a daily basis, Margaret.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to be open, I think, enough to recognize that, too, to see maybe the little signs that you can, glean from their being, and maybe they can't talk to you and they can't express themselves, but there are ways that you would know if you're open.
Yeah, and there's moments of humor. I'd like to relate this. When my mother was in the advanced stages of middle to beginning, not to get too technical. She was hospitalized at a local hospital in West Palm. I went to visit her one day, and I'm going to be a priest, so we don't marry. The bishops don't like their priests to marry. So I'm single. I've never had any children, but I have a brother in town who's married and has 2 children. So I went in to visit my mother when she was in the hospital, and she was smiling, and she goes, "Oh, hi, honey. How are you doing today?" I said, "I'm doing just great, Mom." And she goes, "And how's the wife and kids doing?" And I looked at her and I said, "They're doing great, Mom, thanks." And that was a turning point for me to recognize that you go with the leads of our loved ones. You know, it would have been pointless for me to say, "Oh, no, Mom, you know I'm not married." And it was actually a very tender moment.
Yeah.
For me to share that.
You don't want to correct them, go where they are, like you say, meet them where they are, because at this point you're in her world.
That's exactly
and because
right.
she can't be in yours. So you go to her world, and, you know, that was probably very comforting to her to know that the wife and kids that really don't exist are fine.
That's right.
And because she feels good about that, and you're giving her a sense of satisfaction and knowing that things are good.
That's exactly
Yeah,
right.
that's a very good point to make. So let's turn the corner a little bit, and let's talk about someone who is on hospice, but now they're taking a turn for the worse. And they are in the last stages in the process of passing away, but within just, you know, end of life.
Right.
So how does someone handle that in your experience?
Sure. A big challenge here in Palm Beach County, a lot of our patients in assisted living facilities, a lot of their loved ones are out of the area, they're adult children. So we have to do a lot of communication over the phone. And then when someone really declines and they take a turn, and we know through vitals and the doctors and the nurses that they might have a crisis going on, that we put them on what's called continuous care or crisis care. And then they continue to decline. They can rally under crisis care, but when they're declining and we see that, and it's been going on for a while, then that's when, if someone is out of town, they'll frequently ask us, "Do I need to come into town?" They may have been here the previous week, but the decline can be that quick sometimes. We said, yeah, it's probably not a bad idea to come here. And of course that presents the real challenges of facing the reality that their loved one is going to be passing away, and probably passing away soon. So that's when the whole team rallies, when the doctor and the nurses and the social worker and the aides and the chaplain address the needs of the family, talk to them about any concerns. Is there anything that they need to share with their loved one? Oftentimes, if they're out of the area, they may not be able to come in. I'll say, "Would you like me to hold my phone up to your loved one's ear?" And hearing's the last to go. We do know that.
So that's something that I think people don't always know either, that even though your loved one is not really aware or seems like they're sleeping and they're not responding, but they can still hear you.
They can hear us, and there's pretty sound evidence to that. And I was asked a question not too long ago by a daughter, very realistically. I said, "Go ahead and talk to your mom. She's not responding, but she's hearing." And she turned to me and said, "Chaplain, how do you know that?" I said, "Well, you know, I don't know it for certainty. However, we have a lot of experiences, and there's science to it where a lot of people have had near-death or out-of-body experiences, and they come back and they were certified as having died. Invariably, almost every one of them says, you know, I was there in the operating room, and I heard all the people talking." And the other part of that, too, is that I have been over the last 8 years with dozens and dozens of patients when they took their last breath. And shortly before that, and as I'm holding up the phone to their loved one, they may not have their eyes open. They may not be able to, in fact, they're not able to talk, but I'll see an eyelid twitch. I'll see a slight moment, a movement, and I'm convinced that the loved one has heard, the patient has heard their loved one say, "You know, Mom, I love you. Thank you for being a great mom. Thanks for being such a great dad, a caring dad." And I believe that that's a very important part for everyone.
Yeah, and you hear a lot of the stories that people say that you tell someone that's dying, you know, your son is coming in from, you know, California, and hearing that, it's almost like people feel like they're waiting for that sun to show up before they die. They're waiting for that person. It's almost
That's
like
right.
they hear it and they're not going to go before that person comes. And you hear a lot of stories about that.
You do. We've experienced those, Marcia, absolutely.
Yeah. So how do you comfort the families when here's the end of life? How do you give them any kind of solace, I guess?
Sure. For those families who are present, and they oftentimes are able to be present, one of the things that we do is we always have a VITAS person, whether it's a nurse, a social worker, or a chaplain, 24/7, whether it's 3 o'clock in the morning or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. We're going to have a VITAS person there be at the bedside of a loved one who is deceased. And frequently the loved ones are there with their deceased. And there's crying and there's real emotion. And one of the most important things to do is give them comfort but not redirect that. If someone is going to cry, particularly at the time of their actual passing of a loved one, we let them cry. We provide them comfort later. We provide them comfort there. But the reality is not to deny the real sadness of death. There's no taking away. And then as time goes on, then through bereavement groups and counseling, which we provide, then that's a big part of what we do as hospice chaplains.
I'm glad you said that, because we're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about bereavement counseling.
Good. Thanks, Marcia.
Thanks, Greg.
Good.
We'll be right back.
Wandering is a common problem for people with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's also a problem for family members who care for them. Keeping them safe and secure means never letting your guard down. And even though deep down you know it's time, it hurts to have to ask for help. But it could hurt them even more if you didn't. We know. We understand. We can help. Arden Courts. Feelings of depression, isolation, and frustration are common among persons living with Alzheimer's or related dementias. It's common among those who care for them, too. It takes a lot of patience and courage. It also takes knowing when you can no longer do it alone. At Arden Courts, memory care is all we do. Talk to us. We know. We understand. We can help. Don't let guilt keep you from making the right decision. Visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Somewhere at the corner of bewildered and confused is a lost mother, a father, a sibling, a grandparent. Wandering is a common symptom of Alzheimer's or related dementias and can often make those who care for a loved one feel just as lost. If you're looking for a place that's safe and secure, look to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know. We understand. We can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines. Often occurs with Alzheimer's or related dementias, even among their caregivers. When the time comes for you to decide that someone you love needs more help than you can give, will you be able to recognize it? Don't wait for a crisis to make the decision for you. Talk to Arden Courts. Memory care is all we do. We know. We understand. We can help. To learn more, visit arden-courts.com. Arden Courts follows equal housing opportunity guidelines.
Call into the show at 888-565-1470 and talk with Marcia. Now, back to Caregiver Solutions.
My guest today is Greg, and Greg Sherman is from VITAS Healthcare and Hospice, and he's a chaplain for 8 years. And
8 years.
We've had some great conversation today, Greg, about what happens when people go on hospice and things that families maybe need to know. And now we're at the last days, and our loved one has passed away. It's very difficult, to say the least. So what happens after that? Because people grieve in different ways.
They do.
So it doesn't end there the day the person dies, you have the funeral, but there's a grieving process, and you address that, don't you, with families?
Absolutely. First of all, grief and loss is a very individual process. There are all sorts of myths about grief and loss. One of the biggest myths is that, in a year all will be taken care of. It will go away, and there really is no timing for grief and loss. And it's a process. It's a very individual one. People grieve differently depending on their cultures. Men grieve differently as a whole than women. The type of loss has a lot to do with the grief and loss. But as VITAS Healthcare and Hospice, the chaplains in our entire program, our social workers, provide bereavement counseling either individually. When one of our loved ones, our patients, passes away, we call the primary caregiver within 24 hours if we haven't been present personally at their passing to provide initial counseling, and then we follow up on bereavement. Right here in South Palm Beach County, we have an excellent bereavement group at the VITAS West Atlantic Inpatient Unit between Military Trail and Jog on the north side. Every Monday at 1 o'clock, there's either a trained chaplain or trained social worker facilitating that bereavement group, and I've facilitated those sessions quite a few times. We have anywhere between 8 and 20 people come on a regular basis, people of different stages in their grief and loss. Their loved one may have died maybe only a month ago. We have people coming after, say, a year and a half, that still find nurturing and support in the group, and there is no time limit to that. So we provide that on a regular basis, and we feel very committed to doing that. We don't want to leave our loved ones at the time of death because the loved ones need our support.
Yeah, and it's a really hard, and sometimes people sometimes take years, right, to really move on in some cases. So what advice would you have for families that have a loved one in the last stages, last days of life, and they know that's what's coming? What advice would you give them? We only have a few minutes left, but I think it's important for that to be answered.
There are a lot of decisions to be made over the course of hospice care. Many of them are difficult. One of the most difficult, perhaps for some people, but most important, is to make funeral arrangements ahead of time. There are many, many options out there available. One of the most painful things that can happen, and it's so true, you see it in advertisements, but it is so true, to wait until a loved one passes away. We, through very tender, gentle ways with the family members, suggest that, they should be thinking about funeral arrangements. We're happy to give them options, to discuss possibilities of services, and then they can get that information from various funeral homes in the area. Different funeral homes cater to different religious traditions, so those have to be addressed. I would say that that's perhaps one of the most important ones, that at times, maybe all too frequently, people push away, and I can understand that, but it's something that really should be taken care of.
Yeah, and also, when you mention painful to take care of the arrangements after someone's deceased, it's also more expensive for a couple reasons.
Yes, it is.
Because you're not in the pre-need planning stage where you can do it ahead of time. But also, don't people tend to maybe go overboard at that time because they're very emotional and maybe spend money on things for different reasons just because they're in an emotional state? I've heard that too.
There's truth to that. I mean, I'd like to think that our funeral homes and directors are honest and ethical people, but quite frankly, it's a combination of not necessarily being unethical, but the loved ones themselves, through a sense of guilt, say, you know what, we're gonna spend this amount of money because if we put that more amount of money on a more expensive coffin, then we're gonna somehow feel better. So, Marcia, you're very right. If you do it pre-needs, you've done it ahead of time, you've done it when the pain of the emotional loss is not as intense, it works to the benefit of everybody.
Yeah. So, again, to prepare, because that's what we always give advice to caregivers, to prepare.
That's right.
Have a plan, even if you don't have to execute your plan right away, but have a plan, because I think it makes everybody more comfortable, not so emotional, just know what's going to happen, and then to put those people on the same page, and especially when you have a large family and you're getting advice from everyone in third cousins, and you're trying to please everybody at this particular time, and that's really hard too.
That's
and
so
I know
true.
my mom just passed away, and she was under VITAS care. It was 2 years ago, at the end of July.
Sorry for your loss,
Thank
Martha.
you.
Yeah.
But she was well taken care of in the VITAS unit of the hospital the last week of her life, but she had a lot of support, and they were all very, very kind. And I have to tell you, because you are the chaplain, but there was a hospital chaplain that came into her room and prayed with my aunt who was with her, and shortly after that she was okay to go, and she left us, and it was very peaceful.
I'm so glad you mentioned that aspect of it, because that's one of the things that we as interfaith chaplains really focus in on at the early stages, particularly at the end stages. Whatever the religious tradition is, whether it's Catholic, Protestant, Jewish, non-religion for that matter, there are rituals that are and prayers that are unique to each tradition. So we always, because at that point the loved one either can't say anything or they have passed away, and by asking their loved ones about honoring the parents' religious traditions, they're appropriate Catholic prayers, Protestant prayers, Jewish prayers to say, and we find that begins the part of healing and comforting and consolation for the loved ones present, to honor and acknowledge and actually practice the religious rituals that their parents grew up in.
Yeah, it's very, very important. I want to thank you so much for coming today and sharing. This has been an excellent conversation, much needed, that people need to talk about, don't like to, but
That's right.
It's important.
Thank
you. If you want to find more information about hospice and about VITAS Healthcare Hospice in particular, they can call your
They
offices.
sure can. They can call 561-733-6300. And the best thing to start out, if you're not under hospice care, is to call that number and ask for admissions. And then our admissions people trained will contact you, set up an appointment to see if your loved one is hospice appropriate, and to really guide you through the whole process, to really comfort you and to be with you at a difficult time.
Yeah. People can make that call themselves. They don't have to wait for the doctor to make that call. Is that right?
That's a good point. Absolutely.
Yeah, I had a daughter said, "Why didn't my doctor recommend hospice?" And I said, "Well, you don't have to wait for him to do it. If you think your mother is there, you can go ahead and make that call."
That's exactly right. And one other thing, too, oftentimes, I found many times that people, I understand why, waited too long. They could have benefited from hospice services, and they were hospice appropriate. So don't hesitate to call and have our people or other hospice organizations guide you through the process.
Very good advice. Thank you for coming today.
My pleasure,
Thanks
Marcia.
for sharing. Thank you all for tuning in and watching today. Call Arden Courts. Get that free 36-hour day book. 888-478-2410 is the toll-free number to get the book. We'll be back here, same time, same place next week. In the meantime, don't forget, give someone a hug, because they need it, and so do you. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this week's Caregiver Solutions with Marcia Teal. Join us next week as Marcia, who has 15 years of Alzheimer's disease and dementia care experience, brings you more needed information to help with the care of your loved one. This show can be seen again on caregiversolutions.info, and questions can be left on the site, which may be used on the program to help others. See you next week for more Caregiver Solutions. The opinions expressed